you have to tell your entitled self that the world doesn't owe you anything. So you have to stop being entitled and saying like, I deserve this because I did that. I deserve this because this is what I have achieved. It's a clean slate, and you have to focus on what you do, and you have to stop comparing yourself with others and comparing yourself with what you did before.
Welcome to a new episode of Community in Arabic, sponsored by Lipton Yellow Label, with me, Anwar, Jebran, and Malek Abdulsamad. Our guest today needs no introduction, but for those few people who don't know him, he was named among the 100 leading global thinkers by Foreign Policy magazine and 100 most influential people by Time magazine in 2013. He's a doctor, he's a cardiac surgeon, and he's an author of multiple books. And of course, he's a comedian, whose name became synonymous with the political satire in the Arab world. Thank you so much, Bassem, for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
So Bassem, in your show, American Arabic, and then in the podcast, Remade in America, you touch on what you call the schizophrenia we have as Arabs and addressing our relationship with America and finding our new identity, kind of the break between our identity as Arabs and our identity as Americans, which is kind of a common struggle that immigrants go through when they transition from their original country, like home of origin, to their new home. So in this episode, we'd love to hear from you about your transition, your experience finding your identity as an immigrant in the United States and how you create your new reality here. So we're excited for the conversation. But before we dive in, how was your 2020?
I think it wasn't bad at all. I know it was a year of pandemic and it was terrible, but I think I was lucky enough to continue working on certain projects. And I actually, it was a good year for me. We moved to a new home, to a new area in Los Angeles. So yes, of course, it was tough, طبعا, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. It wasn't that bad خالص. Alhamdulillah, I'm very thankful.
Bassem, I just want to back up to the beginning. Growing up, when did your interest in comedy start growing up?
We all have interest in comedy growing up. It's not something that is specific for someone who has to be on television. And I'm sure that you had your own interest growing up. But the thing is, like, your taste changes and your references and your preferences changes as you grow up. So growing up as a regular Egyptian kid, I watched what my parents watched. I watched the Arabic movies, the Arabic plays, the theater, and then you get exposed bit by bit to Western comedy. So you go through the normal process. You do Friends, and then Seinfeld, and then Frasier.
Exactly.
But then mid 2000s, kida, I got introduced to Jon Stewart, and this is where I was very mesmerized by the political satire, which is something a kind of comedy that we don't have in the Arab world for obvious reasons, so on. And and to understand it in America, you have to be educated about the politics. So for me, Jon Stewart kind of like served two purposes, not just like changing the taste of comedy, but also being informed about how politics works in the United States. And then when you know how something works, you know how to make fun of it, or how to satirize it. So that kind of like that was the journey I was on. And for me, it was just like a hobby, something that I like to watch, and the fact that to actually to work on it, it was kind of a fantasy because of the political situation in the Arab world. And then you don't realize that you're basically seeding stuff until the right moment happens and you sprout. And this is what happens basically to me after the Arab Spring.
I'm a physician as well, and we started, hinting to media a few years ago, and to you as a doctor and as a cardiac surgeon, and with all this influence of the American comedy eventually and political satire, what influenced you to make the switch at that time?
You can't really pinpoint a point of time because it is something that was happening very slowly and incremental. There was not like a point where like, now I'm going to do this. Big ideas starts by small steps, and what I was involved in, or what I was concerned about at that time, was the small steps. Creating a YouTube video, satirizing the Arab, how the state-run media was, uh, distorting the truth. So this is where the seeds of watching Jon Stewart for years kind of like came into fruition, and I started to talk about this. But it wasn't something that like you decide to do. It is something that happens, and then there's an impact and there's a result, and then you deal on the result. or you react on the results. So it's kind of like it happened incrementally, very slowly. I mean, a lot of people don't know that for the first year and a half of my show, even when I was like the show kind of like at its peak, the show on CBC, I was still a doctor. I didn't leave medicine, and I continued to have duties in the hospital. And it
Oh,
wasn't until maybe the second season that I decided to resign and kind of get dedicated to comedy full time.
so Bassem, fast forward to 2014, your show was canceled, and then you had to abruptly leave Egypt, go into Dubai, and then transition to the United States. Can you tell us about how was that transition, through Dubai to the US?
Well, the transition was a little bit tough, I have to say. There was like a lot of moments of uncertainty that I went through, a kind of a moment of fear of the unknown, because my rise to fame was very meteoric and very fast and very exponential, and it was weird and it was not normal. You understand? I came to America and. I didn't know. And people said, "All right, go ahead. You're a legend back home, but what are you going to do here?"
Yeah.
So I didn't know what to do at the beginning, and I wrote the book that you have on the table, Revolution for Dummies, at that time. But at the end, but by then I did like small jobs in Fusion Television. I did like a small like a show called Democracy Handbook,
Yes.
but these were very small tractions, and it didn't really, and I didn't continue to kind of like. To evolve to something bigger, because at the end of the day you're competing in Hollywood with it's the most cutting throat industry in the world, and you have
100%.
everybody competing. Everybody goes from everywhere, and you're
Mm-hmm.
competing with people who are native and like English native speakers, people like stars from all over the world, and
Mm-hmm.
it's tough. So and you also have to there is a psychological component here. The psychological component is you have to make peace with your current status. So basically, you have to tell yourself, you have to humble yourself, saying that what you did in Egypt, what you did in the Arab world, is done, and you should not compare what you do here with what you've done there, because it's going to be different. So I get focused on succeeding in the United States, but not quantifying my success in
Yes.
comparison with what I did in Egypt, because that is something doesn't happen. That rise was very exceptional, and it doesn't make sense that I will make the same kind of success here in America. So I had to make peace that I am in a different journey than what I did in America. That's why when people come and they say like, "Well, you did this in Egypt, in Egypt, and now look what you're doing in America," it's different. And I had to psychologically and deal internally with the fact that I have actually to let go of what happened. It's like a chapter that happened and done, and it's closed, and it's not what I do anymore. So I started to do a lot of university talks and do the speaker circles, and I was doing that. And then uh, I said, I cannot just let go and let's be a speaker. I have to do something else. So I went back to comedy, and this time to stand-up comedy. And this is like was a huge leap, because stand-up comedy is difficult for Americans. So let alone having English as your second language, and now you're having to speak to Americans about something that happened to you in a different country in a different climate. So that took its own kind of journey of me trying to master the tools of this new art. uh, and there's like good decent success that happened in the last couple of years. I'm having my own touring. I go around. I'm not as big, of course, as like people like Kevin Hart or Bill Burr or like the legends that have been doing this for 25 years, which is, of course, I've just started this 2 years ago. So but at least I am kind of like gaining traction, and it's a very slow burn, a very slow process. So this has a lot to do with self discipline, is that you are having to appreciate the small steps that you do in order to advance, and not and you need to kind of like um, I mean, I'm gonna use like a sentence, a phrase that I said, is that you have to tell your entitled self that the world doesn't owe you anything. So you have to stop being entitled and saying like, I deserve this because I did that. I deserve this because this is
Mhm.
what I have achieved. It's a clean slate, and you have to focus on what you do, and you have to stop comparing yourself with others and comparing yourself with what you did before. Theodore Roosevelt has a very famous quote saying, "Comparison is the thief of joy." So
Yeah,
when you
that's a
stop
very good, yeah.
comparing that, you will enjoy the little successes that you do without having to compare it with something bigger that you did or something bigger that you see and you want to do. And just like something, it will come in its own time. And meanwhile, I'm enjoying the process of learning and the process of evolving and the process of reinventing myself. Reinvention is something that is said and thrown around very lightly, but it is actually something that is a very elaborate process that you have to deal with and work on yourself on it every single day.
In 2016 and 2017, you did the Revolution for Dummies, you did the Tickling Giant. We felt after that those were kind of a closure of that time of your career, and now you want to focus on trying to prove yourself here in the United States.
Yeah,
Bringing your culture.
the Tickling Giants in the
Does that? Yeah.
documentary, it is something that was done about me. I didn't do it. It was someone who followed me for 4 years who did it, and the book was to kind of encapsulates my experience. But you're totally right. I felt that this was kind of like that is me kind of like putting an end to that. And like, I mean, speaking of books, I just like published this book, The Magical Reality of
Yes, yes. You
Media.
want to talk? I know.
It's
I
a
know.
children's book that is published by Scholastic, the publishers of Harry Potter. And
Yeah.
this is like for school kids here in America. This is
I
like a
know.
total pivot to do this.
Correct.
Yesterday, I was in Venice Beach in a parking lot doing
We saw
outdoor
your story.
comedy
Yes, we
and
saw
doing
it.
it.
Yeah.
And the day before, I was sharing a stage with Jeremy Piven, the guy from Entourage. And the day before, I was with Jim Jeffries. And I'm doing comedy for people who don't know me. I mean, yeah, like Friday, I was in Huntington Beach, and there was like 600 people, and they're all white Americans coming for Jeremy Piven, and I was opening for him.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the day before, there was like 300 people coming from Jim Jeffries, and I'm opening for him, and I'm doing 10 minutes each. Yesterday, I did my whole hour. I was the headliner. But in all of these three cases, these are people who don't know who I am,
Mhm.
and I am trying to break into that kind of market, and it's tough for anybody,
It is.
even for Americans who've lived here all their lives. Being an immigrant, your English is your second language. English is your second language, and you're coming here and just started stand-up comedy 2 years ago.
Actually, that's a great segue for the next question is, when you're reading the books and then the early projects that you did versus what you're doing now, it feels like you had a shift in audience. So who do you see as your main audience today? Who would you like to be your main audience today?
My main audience are people who are residing in the United States and in the Western world in general. These are people who are aware of the things that's happening globally that is centered here in the Western world. So it could be Americans who live here, Arabs who live here. I mean, I have to be very honest. I was in one of the Arab countries and I did my show that I do here, and it didn't go quite well there. And then I
Oh,
realized it is very American centric.
Yeah.
And I realized that even my interests and even my comedy have shifted, because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, comedy is a product. Comedy, drama, art, whatever, is the product of your truth. And my truth now is that I am an immigrant who is residing here, who is living here in this
Mhm.
new place. So all of my comedy is informed and shaped by that status. And this is why there's kind of a rift. I mean, the bad thing is like the people who grew up or like got used to you watching in dynamic, they are still locked in that place, and I have moved along from there. So it is very, very common to see it. For example, if I go out with Colbert or if I go out with a show, and then it's, oh, we don't like you, it's just so bad. Yes, because you are in that mental state,
Right.
and I have moved on to a different mental state and a
Right.
different identity, because we come here, we are the product of our community, of our personal experiences, of our political environment, which is here.
Mhm.
This is why people wanted me to talk, for example, why don't you talk about what happens in Egypt? Why don't you talk about what happens in? It's not my truth anymore.
Right.
I don't belong there anymore. I belong here more. This is my everyday life here. So when I'm much more proficient, I'm much more able to talk about things like gun control laws or the Constitution or the American elections, then I would talk about what is happening in the Middle East. And when I talk about the Middle East, I talk about it through the lens of someone who was there and came here and kind of transferring or channeling that information to Americans and Arabs who live here. So this is the dynamic shift that happened to me in the last couple of years. And it didn't happen intentionally. It happened because it is very organic.
Because you interact with the environment that you live in, basically. The really important thing when we first come to the United States as Arab immigrants, but now, you know, when we interact with the American culture, you know, all the politics there, now we become Arab Americans, right? That's the beauty of America, right? A nation of immigrants.
The problem of this is that so many Arab Americans or Arab immigrants, they come here and they still lock themselves in the mental status of
Yes.
being in the Arab world. They never leave.
Yeah.
And then they complain why America doesn't care about them.
Yes.
Because you have not involved yourself. I mean, look, for example, look to the South Asian community. Look to the Indians and the Pakistanis. They have no shame calling themselves Americans. They have no shame working as Americans. In the Arab world we have some kind of a shame. Oh, you're an American, to American. You don't. No, it's like why this whole kind of like victimization or the victimhood kind of mentality that America did this to us, we should be enemies, and then you come here and you're basically living in this country and you have this kind of wall. And if you don't create this kind of wall, your people back home is trying to kind of blackmail you or push you on trying to create that kind of wall and make you ashamed that you are an American and make you ashamed that you are in a new status now. They want to pull you back into their own misery and their own problems. But the thing is, you have new problems. You have new issues.
Exactly.
And that is your truth. Your truth is no longer back there. Your truth is here. All right? And this is how you create change, by bringing in your interest, your culture, your intellectual ideas into this new country in order to shift the dynamics towards your own interest here in America. But what happens is that people come here and they consider themselves immigrants. They consider themselves temporary. 25 years, they always think about when I'm going to go back to my own country in the Arab world.
Right.
So they end up not getting involved here, not getting actually completely assimilated in the community, and unable to go back. Because 25 years, it's like you can't.
It's way
You have become so comfortable here. You cannot live a single week if it's not a vacation. You cannot deal with the reality there, because it's not your
100%.
reality anymore. So that's why you have like a people in the middle, kind of a lost generation of immigrants who do not know how to deal with the new reality here in America, and not even contributing back. They're just like somewhere in the middle.
100%. Actually, we noticed this through a lot of the work that we do with Chicago in Arabic and New York in Arabic. Is a lot of people come here, and then you go and you cluster with the rest of the Arab community in some suburb. You stick to it. You identify more strongly as an Arab when you come to the US than you did when you were in the Arab world. You stay away from the city. You refuse to assimilate to the city. And then before you know it, you don't belong here and you don't belong there. And that's the worst place to be.
I mean, it's fine to kind of like still be connected to the culture. It's fine. I mean, the Chinese do it, the Indians do it. Indians still go to Indian restaurant, whatever. But then, even not just Arabs, by the way, Arabs, Chinese, whatever, there are some sector of those immigrants who just like want to stay in their own country even when they're here in America. So their friends, their circles, their interest, their leisure time, everything is still their own country there, and they do not want to move on. They don't want to assimilate. And then you find yourself that you are living in ghettos of your own creation. And these are not just like physical ghettos. I'm not just talking about the hookah place that you go every night.
Yeah.
I'm talking about mental ghettos.
Yeah. Yes.
You kind of like put a big wall of you trying to assimilate into that community and trying to affect change.
Bassem, actually, I'm curious. Are you optimistic that through some of these projects that you're doing, you can actually deliver a message to the Arab Americans or these Arab immigrants that are stuck in their community to help move them out of that mental state and kind of open their eye to the fact that they're maybe a little bit overdoing it and they should just open up to the new world that they live in?
My hope is that will happen regardless. I mean, at the end of the day, relatively speaking, we are very new immigrants. Arab as a sector, as an ethnicity, we're very new compared to Indians, compared to Chinese, compared to Koreans, we're very new. And what I see in the next generation, I mean, I think that will happen. I think that's a generational issue. I think the younger generation are much more assimilated, and the younger generation are much more understanding of what does it mean to be part of that new reality, new community, new country.
Yeah.
It is different when you come here and then like as a I can't as an immigrant, not even first generation, as an immigrant, and then you're still connected there. I think my biggest challenge is like coming and having to accept that, for example, my kids are not fully Egyptian. Yes, they have the Egyptian passport, but they also have the American passport, both of
Yes.
them. But the most important is that I have to educate myself and condition myself that um, their variables, their givens, their circumstances are different than when I was when growing up, and I have to deal with them that way. I have to deal with them as Americans, and this is their new society, and there's the new rules, and I have to kind of like not impose what I went through as a younger kid on them because it's different. So this is the mental obstacle that a lot of fathers or mothers come here and have to deal with in this new community. So I have to kind of like be conscious all the time that she's a product of a different culture and circumstances than me being a product of my own circumstances and culture.
100%. I feel like it's really unfair that when you bring a kid here and then you force them to live a culture that they're not aware of, that they didn't grow up in, and they cannot connect with. It's like very difficult for these kids to kind of like understand, why am I having to live through this set of rules that I just don't see around me, and I can really do not understand. But Bassem, moving on to your comedy and all the comedy shows that you're doing, you focus so much about storytelling and talking about the issues rather than addressing stereotypes, right? Like rather than getting onto the stage and trying to make fun of people that are sitting in front of you. So who influenced your style in comedy, if anybody, and how did they do so?
George Carlin. I mean, I think he's one of the most brilliant minds ever that did comedy, and because his
Yeah.
comedy is that kind of like very different kind of comedy. I think that will come to mind. I like Jim Jeffries, who's a
Yeah.
totally different style, but he's doing the same thing with a different style. Uh, I am not a veteran stand-up comedian. I cannot compete with people who have been doing stand-up comedy for 25 years. So their style of comedy. So yesterday, for example, my comedy was different. I mean, the people came in and they did like 10, 15 minutes, which is like hilarious, very funny. People were like screaming out of laughter. Mine is much more of like a slow burn. It's like a slow it's kind of like people still laughing. They're not like screaming, but they're engaged. The whole time I'm speaking, they're like focused.
Yes.
What's going on?
Right.
That's a story that's going on. So even there's one of the stand-up comedians like, this is not just funny, it was educational. This is the kind of comedy that I want to push forward, and hopefully maybe one day it will succeed somehow here.
I really love that, and I actually have George Carlin's book under your book here, because I always say, I learned about George Carlin when I first immigrated to the U.S. through some friends, and when I listen to him, I feel like if you take the jokes out of it, this can be a political speech. He's really raising awareness about a certain topic in a satirical way.
100%, 100%.
We really like looking at your content. Basically, as I was telling Malek, it's not even about the comedy itself. It's how you deliver the message, and being a good communicator, and creating all these content. Like for example, it talk about Remade in America, Plant B, and also being an author of these multiple books. Being a good communicator here now in the age of social media, and knowing how to captivate the audience is a very important thing. I just want to talk about a bit about the Remade in America. Like in 2018, you did that podcast. What did you learn from that experience? Talking to multiple guests. What did that give you as an idea in terms of the American culture?
So what is so unique about America is that it's a new country, right? And being a new country, it is a kind of a receptive body for so many people from so many different backgrounds. So whether that was immigrants, whether that was like ethnic groups, whether that was religious groups, and the thing is, because of the freedom of expression, everybody is free to express his views, even if you don't agree with them. So the whole idea of the podcast of Remade in America is that everybody comes to America and he's not made in America, he's remade, because you cannot really ignore all of the dynamics of different kind of ethnicities and ideas and people around you. So your ideas get reshaped. So whether you are coming from a different country, like for example the Latino woman who's like the first Latino in NPR, or whether you are someone who's born in America, and you were, for example, brought up in a religious background, and then you decided to do something else that is totally non-religious, whether you were born in the middle of America, whether you came from a different country and you make it, this is all like the remaking process that happens in America. And the biggest part about this is like how it is so interesting that this this country is full of people that's so different from each other. I come from a place, we come from a region that fights the notion of being different. It actively fights you
Right.
if you are different. If
Right.
you are different religiously, if you are different ethnically, if you are different politically, if you are different sexually, you will be fought. You will be fought and oppressed and maybe eliminated. But America doesn't do that. America, of course, I mean, at a for a certain extent, it does. I mean, it's not a paradise, but at a certain extent, people are still allowed, and for a very short, like period of time, some of those people are persecuted in the streets. But because it is so fresh in mind, it is very interesting that like how a group of people were not allowed to go into the same place as white people and to dine, or how certain group of people, because of their orientation, they were killed in the streets of San Francisco. Now you don't have that, and that only took 50 years. So this is very impressive, and it's an interesting way to study how that people that come from different backgrounds can actually come together to build a great nation. Because this is not just like happening in the Arab world. Even here in America, the right wing always plays on this kind of idea of identity politics, is that we are afraid of you because you're different, you're coming here to destroy America. Well, in fact, being different is one of the reasons why is this country is strong. And even my book, the children's book that I write about Nadia, it is actually the main theme of that book is that being different is cool, and being different actually adds to the pot, doesn't take away from it. So I think that is the main idea. Because if you look at the politics back in the Arab world, whether I mean, half of the Arab world is either ruled by a religious regime or a military regime. That is the title. And both of them, if you think about it, they are enemies of change, and they are enemies
Right.
of diversity. I mean, religious regimes are no different from military regimes. I mean, the only difference is that the military, you see them all wearing the same uniform, walking the same steps, doing the same salute, having like this pyramid hierarchy. But religion is the same. Maybe you're
Right.
not wearing the same. Some countries you will wear the same because you think the same, and you're not allowed to think outside. So you either, because if you think outside, you'll either clash with the divine or clash with the military.
Yes.
So that's the whole idea. So when you kind of like, and that's the, by the way, and that's the right wing everywhere, and that's the problem of the right wing in America right now, because they are
Exactly.
religiously and military. I don't want to say brainwashed, but like that's their predilection. Anyway, so that is the whole idea about like being different and how it's different from the Arab world compared to the United States.
When did you feel the sense of belonging that I'm now an individual here in the U.S.? I'm not a newcomer. I belong here. I want to contribute here. I want to raise a family in the U.S. and continue to this new home, basically.
So this is again not a point of in time. This is has
Also
something that
process.
happened very incrementally and very slowly. I am there now, and I've been there for maybe a couple of years, and I have this
Okay.
feeling now. But it has actually started from the beginning. From the beginning, I kind of, when I came here, I said, that's it. I mean, I'm here. I have to make it.
That's okay.
And I think it is a big part of it also depends on your success in here in your field. Because if you're not successful, it's very hard to belong.
Right.
So hopefully, yani, if you build on this success and you continue to move forward here, that feeling of belonging will even deepen.
100%. One of the things that we did as we worked on, Chicago in Arabic and these other, outlets is we thought about one step for belonging is understanding where you live, connecting with the history of where you live, connecting with the architecture of the city that you're in, connecting with the streets of the city that you're in. So you feel like this is my home. And now, I can mentally start transitioning into feeling that, this is my new reality, and I move on. Bassem, what I want to ask is, your name is synonymous with a lot of political content, political satire, whether it's American politics or air politics. But in the same time, you shifted away from politics to do other, content, other programs like Plant B. So what
I
is
did. I didn't shift. I diversified. That's different.
okay, okay.
That's different because the thing is, here's the problem. Here's the problem with also with the mentality of people who look at you. It's like, oh, you left that behind. No, it is. I mean, it's not a replacement.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that is some. This is something that this is my truth that I live every day, as someone
Mm-hmm.
who has chose that kind of lifestyle, and I saw that the kind of good that it could do, and
Of
I'm kind
course.
of like taking this on the side. But that did not stop my political satire. That did not stop my comedy. That did not stop my entertainment business. That did not stop of me writing a children's book. That did not stop of me doing a podcast. This is something that's on the side. But the
Mm-hmm.
thing is, that's again, that is the kind of like monochromatic way of how people in the Arab world look at you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're just like in the kitchen cooking. Yes, but that's not just the only thing I do.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, for example, Gwyneth Paltrow, for example, and
Yeah.
I'm not comparing myself to her. Yani she's an A-lister. She's an actor, and she has Goop,
Goop.com, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Goop.com, which is bullshit. But anyways, so but that did not take away from her being Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
Ryan Reynolds, for example, is like sold his
Brand
gin
company.
Yes.
gin brand. That did not stop him being. But the thing is, just like this, how you can only be one thing.
100%.
You know, this
Right.
is something that I enjoy. I enjoy helping people, and kind of carries a little bit of my history as a doctor, as a medical doctor, using this in order to the betterment of people.
Since when you've been fully vegan?
Plant-based, I've been since 2013, in September 2013. So this is my 8th year.
Do you think the community was receptive of your message about veganism, and do you think that you were able to address some of the misconceptions about being vegan and inviting people to try it?
So this is very interesting because I remember when I started talking about it, the kind of black backlash and attack was vicious,
Wow.
vicious. Even my friends felt sorry for me, and I even went to a lot of friends to kind of go into partnership with them, and they were afraid because of the backlash, because the backlash happened for two reasons. Number one, it is the regular backlash that happens when everybody starts to talk about plant-based diets. This is like they consider this as an attack on their lifestyle. And I
Mm-hmm.
understand that because many of the vegan vocal voices, the activist vegans, are very annoying. And I am the first one to say this. They shame you, they attack you, they make you feel bad about what you do, but I don't never do that.
Right.
So they kind of like they kind of project what they have from these people, and they project it on you. And that's why they kind of they create this kind of like straw man argument where they start to attack you of things that I never said it, but other people said it. But that's not
Yeah.
my opinion. So that is one. But the biggest thing is that my brand as a political comedian always came into play, because as a political comedian, you basically you earn enemies every day, because your kind of comedy does not work well with other people. So they
Right.
attack you. They kind of like, oh, that's our payback now. There's like, oh, now you. So they kind of like demean you. It's like, oh, you know, it's talking, you're cooking, you cannot speak about politics. So the people will attack you, either the people that you have created enemies of, or people who want you to continue doing the same thing in the Arab world of political comedy, but you just like that you're in a different place now. So they consider that as a sellout or a kind of like of a defeat. So they kind of come and kind of. So that was like a very very difficult, very it was like an uphill journey, I have to say. However, what is so important now, and it's so good, and what makes me happy, in after 8 years, you can visibly see the shift of reception, because now a lot of people tried it, and now a lot of people have actually improved, and now a lot of people have actually seen the difference, and now people actually can see the good in that, devoid of all of the political noise and all of the other preconception noise that was there.
Mm-hmm.
And now,
Just pure health and environment, basically.
exactly. So now people can see that. A lot of people now can differentiate. Okay, there's Bassem who's doing this, and this, and then there's Bassem who's doing this that I'm feeling better because I follow. Now there's even now a lot of people who are came out to say I tried. Now I tried Bassem Youssef system. It's not Bassem Youssef system. It's a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
But now my name became synonymous with that, with the Arab word, and that helped me. And yes, and every time I will put something that's related to a plant-based diet, I would still have the attacks. I would still have the vicious attacks. I would still have the people who are very mean. But now you have people coming in and defending that, and people saying that is my own experience. I felt it, and it made a huge difference in me. And especially now, people are trying to seeing that I'm not a militant vegan, and I speak openly. So guys, you know what? Yesterday I ate fish. That is like my once in a 2 month thing that I will do.
Yes.
I will eat eggs every now and then, and I tell people it is not what you do. It's not a cult. It's not a religion. You know, it's a very, very, very. It's if you feel better going 100%, that's amazing. If you feel amazing going 90%, that's still good. If you make only 50% change, and you felt great about yourself and your health is improved, that's the whole idea. So people now are starting to kind of categorize and analyze and kind of what do you call it? Kind of see the different levels of messaging that I'm doing.
Everybody gets scared to try something new, but once they try it, they think it's. I feel great. That was such a great advice, actually,
and you'll see. I will always find people that attack you, and you just have to be resilient. I mean, I have to say that like a lot of people came to us like Bassem with the kind, yani, we could not believe that you actually continued 8 years because you've seen the kind of attacks that you had experienced because of that alone. A lot of people have given up.
Yeah,
but I didn't. 8 years of continuing. That was like a very difficult 8 years, I have to say, and still continuing. But if you believe in something and you're resilient about it, hopefully it will have a result. Now I'm actually developing a Plan B app.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we are developing. We're kind of like into the MVP concept. We just finished the beta testing, and we tried it with people, and we're gonna see that product. We did like a whole Plan B app experiment on Zoom, where we had like 8 people, and these people went into a transformation of 2 months, and it's the results are like crazy. So that will be a way to kind of market our app. So that app will be like a platform of wellness where people have a monthly subscription-based style where you pay monthly for medical supervision, for health coaching, for recipes that is tailored to your medical condition. We work with the doctors, and we have even bigger ideas, inshallah, when that happens. But what I always tell people is that if you believe in something and you're resilient, I mean, Plan B, it was ridiculed, it was torn down, it was attacked, and now I came out of it of like, I have a website that is very active. I have done a YouTube channel, a YouTube show, which, by the way, turned into a TV show. Ask Bassem.
Oh, it did. Oh,
yeah, it did. It was just premiered on El Shar. So I did the same transition what I did in El Bernameg. I started YouTube, and then I did a TV show. And I'm now in negotiation in multiple channels actually to do a reality TV show of a change. And now I'm turning it into a business. So there's something that people ridiculed me in turned into a movement, a business path, and a media path.
And that shows.
If I would have given up in the first 2 years, I wouldn't have been here.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And that shows resilience and being persistent on doing a project that you believe in. I'm really curious to know your opinion about this. Do you feel that kind of the U.S. They say the American dream and the land of opportunity. Are you kind of realizing that going through all these projects?
Yes, but at the end of the day, it's not a guaranteed path, because also, I mean, America could be the home of the American dream, and could be a deathbed to your fantasies. It's you never know. I mean, people here either make it or break it. Or people just like stay in the middle. Definitely, it has opportunities. It's great and whatever, but it is not a guaranteed recipes for success just to be here. As you said, you have to hustle. You have to be creative, and I'm still learning about so many things here. And you can find yourself one day on top of your game, and the other day you're forgotten. And that's just like the nature of things.
Under the theme of diversification, you move from plant-based, and you just wrote a book recently, The Magical Reality of Nadia, addressing the issues of identity and diversity. Yes. So tell us a little bit about the book.
So this book is very dear to my heart, and the reason is that the last thing I would ever expect is that to write a children's book. I mean,
Right.
even when my agents came to me, it's like, why don't you write a children's book? It's like, I don't know how to write a children's book.
Yeah.
So we went back and forth, and I said, like, why don't you think of something that is informed by your own experience and come back with a proposal, and we will help you realize that dream. I went back and I wrote down a concept that at the end of the day, like my experience as someone who had experienced hardship because of my different opinion, people here experience hardship because they're different, period. And I believe that all of the problems that we have of understanding people and kind of being empathic to people is that we don't deal with many of those problems from an early age. I think all of our adulthood problems come from the fact that they weren't addressed as young kids. So I thought, like middle-aged kids, is this is where the age where people start to the kids start to realize these differences. They hear things about racism, skin color, inclusion, discrimination. So I thought, like, why don't we write a children's book that is dealing with these issues, but using something also close to my heart, which is Egyptian ancient history, and using magic as a vehicle to explain that to little kids. So this is how I wrote it, and they liked the idea, they loved it, and they kind of, put me with a co-author, Catherine Daly, lovely woman, and this is how the book came to life. And hopefully, we're in negotiations now with certain platform to make this into an animation project. So
That was actually next on my list. I mean, when I was looking through it, all the animation, the story, the storyline, it's like a perfect setup for like a movie or like a show for
yeah,
kids.
yeah, Powerhouse, which is a very established. They're the one who did Castlevania, Captain Underpants. They're very, very strong animations. They're very things like, listen, this tool that you created, you just like lends itself easily for animation.
We even were talking like this easily could be like a Disney character. The past 10, 20 years, for example, they're addressing the fact that all Chinder's character were white, basically. So now they had an African American version. They touch on the Asian American, but nothing about Arab American. So that would be hopefully, wish you all the best with this project. Maybe we'll see it a Disney character at one point.
I hope so.
Bassem, from stand-up comedy to the books you wrote to Plant B and your new book, The Magical Reality of Nadia, what's next for you?
Living in Hollywood or in Los Angeles is always it's a continuous hustle. Always like those projects in the pipeline, and you go and you pitch. I mean, I teamed up with like many amazing executive producers for travel shows, political shows, but this something happens like takes its time, and you just wait around. I mean, maybe people think it's easier now that you have a lot of platform, but actually the competition is harder because everybody wants to attract the biggest talent in order to dominate. The second thing is that I want to have my stand-up comedy to turn into a Broadway or an off-Broadway production, where it's going to be a one-man show and do theatrical. I've already been working with a theatrical director who directed the Broadway hit "What the Constitution Means to Me," and we are closing a deal with Audible to do that as an Audible project and hopefully
Wow.
off-Broadway project. So we will see. I mean, this is something that I have not done before, and I'm very very fortunate to be in a position where I kind of like elevate myself into a different. I kind of challenge myself into new venues. So it's for me, this whole thing is a continuous learning project or learning process.
And I'm curious about something now. In the process of establishing yourself or remade in America, do you envision at some point in the future, hopefully, you're having a great successful career, to go back to the Arab world, do remote there, or now the focus is North America?
I don't think about that now.
Okay. Okay.
If it happens, it happens. But
Okay.
and it's not unusual to find someone who makes it, here and then come back. But I don't know. I don't know even come back in what capacity. Should I would I be working with an Arab government about plant-based diet? Will I be doing would I be doing TV shows in some other Arab country? I don't know. I have no idea.
So, Bassem, in closing, we're so eager to ask you about your advice for new immigrants, but I know you don't like to offer advice. So, can you tell us about can you tell us about what worked for you in your transition something that you would recommend, if I would say not advise?
Yeah, I think there's something I already said in the interview. You have to really embrace your new identity, and you have to look at this as your new home. If you continue to view your position as temporary, you will not go anywhere. If you tell yourself that this is it, this is going to be my future, this is going to be my home, you will automatically you will go into a mood of someone who wants things to happen instead of having this fake safety net that I can go back anytime. So I think that's the only thing I can say.
Bassem, really, thank you so much for for the time you take to chat with us, and we really salute you for all your efforts, and we are your biggest fans. So thank you so much for all these stuff, and it was a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, and we look forward to meeting in person someday.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, guys.